There's a turning point in this game nobody talks about, and it changes everything. Because Dune isn't just one game, it's three. A survival game, an MMO and a PvP sandbox. Stacked in sequence but never fully fused. I was critical in my first impressions. 100 hours later, I was dead wrong. Some things were far better than I expected and others much worse. No guides, no shortcuts, just mistakes, getting lost and learning the hard way. So let's start where Dune shines brightest, the world. When it comes to visuals and atmosphere, this is probably the most straightforward praise I can give Dune Awakening. The desert looks gorgeous. Technically speaking, the game's graphics aren't at the cutting edge, individual asset quality isn't especially high, and you have probably heard soundtracks that stuck with you more. But what does stand out is how all of it, the visuals, sounds and world layout, comes together as a cohesive whole. The endless dunes, scattered rocky plateaus, and diverse biomes across the Haga Basin each tell their own story, yet all remain grounded in the game's central theme, a vast, unforgiving desert. It never breaks immersion. The soundtrack subtly shifts to match the tone of each region, sometimes tense and foreboding, other times a more mystical, nomadic desert soundscape. It's not just open sand seas either. You will traverse irradiated wastelands, scale towering cliffs marked by hostile encampments, weave through jagged stone spires that rise like a forest of shattered spears, and descend into deep layered chasms where the wreckage of fallen ornithopters lies buried in silence. You will crawl through connected networks of mining tunnels, traverse highland steppes with tribal outposts, and eventually reach the deep desert itself, a region that looks less like land and more like an ocean of sand. Waves of sand stretch dozens of meters high, broken only by tiny, distant rock clusters, and every stretch of ground is crawling with massive sandworms, making traversal in those regions a near suicidal task. In short, Dune's world is beautifully crafted. It draws you in with sheer scale and visual variety. The only time the visuals really let me down was inside the Imperial Lab dungeons. Without the sweeping desert backdrop, you're suddenly up close with isolated interior assets. And in that context, the average asset quality becomes harder to overlook. The lighting doesn't do much to mask it either. These dungeons aren't the visual highlights of Dune, but in a way that contrast just emphasizes how impressive the open world truly is by comparison. It's not just a place to explore, it's a hostile journey through something ancient and merciless. And make no mistake, you will be covering a lot of ground in this game. The world map is massive. While the early zones, like the copper and iron regions, are relatively easy to navigate, later areas become increasingly complex. You will find yourself facing natural obstacles, vertical terrain, and layered elevation that forces you to take roundabout paths or detour completely. Quicksand fields in particular can block entire routes, pushing you into long loops just to get where you are going. Fortunately, the vehicles in Dune Awakening are surprisingly well designed. Plenty of RPGs have tacked on mounts or vehicles that feel like awkward, weightless add-ons. Think of all the games where riding a horse feels so off and in addition prevents you from interacting with the world, so you end up walking most of the time anyway. Not here. Driving actually feels good. It's not ultra realistic. Your vehicle will even auto-flip back onto its wheels if you push it too far, but that slight arcade feel makes it responsive and fun rather than clunky or frustrating. And in a world this size, that's important, because you will be driving a lot. There's a range of traversal options. The bike is your first all-purpose ride. Fast, nimble, reliable. The buggy serves more as a workhorse, perfect for hauling resources and heavy storage. The ornithopter is where things shift into high gear, literally and metaphorically. It marks the start of your endgame experience, giving you aerial mobility that becomes essential for crossing the deep desert. And finally, the Sandcrawler, a hulking utility vehicle used mostly by large guilds to efficiently harvest spice from wide open fields. Most vehicles come in multiple tiers, and in the case of the Ornithopter, even different variants. Building your first version at a new tech tier, especially if you're playing solo, can be a significant undertaking. Crafting your first Ornithopter alone isn't something you will knock out in an afternoon. The bike and the ornithopter can even be stored in a portable tool slot as long as they are unloaded, basically giving you that classic MMO mount-on-demand convenience. The interplay between vehicle mechanics and the scale of the world is one of the game's strengths. They work hand in hand to create a traversal system that feels immersive, rewarding, and most importantly, necessary. But Dune's world isn't just vast and immersive, it's also dangerous. Which brings us to its survival mechanics. At their core, you're managing just a few basic threats: heatstroke, dehydration, sandstorms, and of course, the worms. On paper, it's not the most punishing survival system. If you avoid direct sunlight, your water doesn't drain too quickly. There are also plenty of water sources scattered around the map. Sandstorms, while dramatic, are easy to avoid if you're paying attention. And sandbombs? They are mostly a threat only when you deliberately venture into the deep desert zones to farm high-value resources. But here's the thing, they don't need to be more complex. What they do incredibly well is create a psychological loop. A constant, low-grade tension that lives in the back of your mind. The sense that if something goes wrong, it could go really wrong. Let me give you an example. I was near my base in the carbon biome when a squad of Sardaukar ambushed me. They caught me in a crossfire, nothing too serious, but I had to fall back. There was a small radar camp about 50 meters behind me, but they weren't close enough to aggro. I thought I was safe. Then, bam! A sandstorm hit. I hadn't seen the warning since I was focused on the fight. The storm cut visibility and slowed my movement to a crawl. And to make matters worse, the Sardaukar were now between me and my outpost, and I was still wounded. I managed to limp toward a cliff, looking for shelter. I found a small crevice that gave me the sheltered condition. Relief. Then suddenly, a raider and one of the Sardaukar followed me in. Low health, no escape, cramped quarters. I survived. Somehow. But the adrenaline was real. Looking back, I wouldn't have lost anything if I had died. My base was right there. But in that moment, it felt like survival. I wasn't thinking about loot recovery or respawn mechanics. I was thinking, don't die. That's what this system does well. It triggers that early game mindset before your gamer brain kicks in and reduces everything to numbers and systems. The desert feels dangerous not just because of what it is, but because of what it might do. Especially early on, sandworms are terrifying. Even crossing 100 meters on foot feels risky. And unlike most player deaths, where you can just recover your gear, worms are the exception. If they get you, they destroy everything you are carrying. No loot recovery, no second chances. They are the ultimate threat. And sometimes, the only way to get resources you need is to march straight into their territory. What I appreciate most about Dune's survival design is that it's not bloated. There aren't 100 overlapping systems that suffocate the experience. Instead, the game focuses on just enough heat, thirst, storms, worms, and uses those to paint the thematic core of the Dune universe. Water, sun, sand, and Shai-Hulud, the ultimate ending. No, it's not the most mechanically complex survival game out there, but it absolutely nails the psychological tension of survival. And that tension enhances exploration, especially in the early hours, where you're still thinking like a survivor, not a system analyst. Eventually, yes, your understanding grows. You start to see the patterns, exploit the edges, minimize the risks, and bit by bit that sense of immersion fades. But for a while it really works, and in those moments Dune's survival system feels exactly how they should. Unforgiving, atmospheric, and just dangerous enough to keep your nerves sharp. Like in most survival games, resource farming and base building play a big role in Dune Awakening. And honestly, that part is a lot of fun. Your gear progression is tied directly to resource tiers, and those resource tiers are locked behind the different regions you will reach as you move forward. As you unlock new zones, your movement option, harvesting tools, survival gear, and combat equipment all jump in power. And when you return to older zones with higher tier tools, the efficiency spike feels massive. Like you've brought an excavator to enhance shovel problem. It almost starts to feel like a theme park experience. You are on a ride from one biome to the next, following a clear path of here's where to go next, and here's how to get stronger when you do. This progression loop also happens to be one of the most inviting opportunities for co-op play. While I played mostly solo, I have seen the magic of cooperative base building in other survival games, and here it's easy to imagine how great it could be. One person gathering water, another scouting new resource spots, a third setting up an outpost in the next farming area. It's the kind of system that could create some fantastic shared moments, and yeah, you will absolutely reach new tech tiers faster as a group. That said, there's a point worth making from a solo perspective. For the most part, the farming loop is well paced and rewarding, but there's a point, especially when you are trying to push through the steel tier, where it starts to feel like the system was designed with small teams in mind, not individuals. And then there's a slightly odd bit about water. Thematically, water is supposed to be the most precious substance on Arrakis. It's the lifeblood of survival, but once you get deep into the base building side, things start to feel, well, a little off. You will walk through corridors lined with blood purifiers and cisterns, death traps that liquefy intruders, wind traps that pull moisture from the air, and dew collectors operated by tech-savvy players farming plants with high-end tools. Before long, your base might be stocked with hundreds of liters of water, used casually, burned through in crafting, stored like it's nothing. Let's just say, in terms of thematic consistency, the game kind of loses the plot when it comes to water scarcity. But gameplay-wise, the loop works. Crafting, building, farming, whether solo or with others, is rewarding. Just don't think about how many bodies you are converting into water or how many gallons you are pumping into your crafting station every day. Shai-Hulud might start asking questions. In terms of power, the weapons feel rewarding to chase. Some come with strong, unique modifiers like dramatically extended shotgun range, heavy charged attacks, or disruptor effects that enhance burst damage. Tools, crafting benches, and storage options also get huge efficiency upgrades with each new tech tier. So what does upgrading gear feel like in practice? Mostly like chasing straightforward stat increases, either through tech tree upgrades or, if you're lucky, finding a permit that matches your current tier. Old permits from outdated tiers, mostly useful as trade fodder. But where the system feels shallow is in build crafting, depth and uniqueness. Despite a good variety on item types, there's almost no gear that leads into synergy, specialization or playstyle customization. You won't find set bonuses that enhance your action skills. Gear that enables radically different playstyles like tanky brawlers versus stealth snipers, exotic affixes that unlock entirely new mechanics. At best, you might get a dagger that extracts blood for crafting purposes or a suit of armor that boosts aerial speed in some undocumented and barely perceptible way. Could there be deeper, more synergistic loot in the far endgame? Maybe, but if it exists, it's buried very deep in the deep desert, well beyond what I reached in over 100 hours of gameplay, and honestly, I doubt it. Now let's talk about the other half of gear progression, the economy. Dune implements what could be called a transformative loot system. In theory, nearly everything, items, recipes, permits can be traded or repurposed or converted into something else through the in-game exchange terminals. These terminals function much like the auction houses you would find in other MMOs, player-run markets where nearly anything can be bought or sold. This is enabled by a fully player-driven economy where prices and exchange rates are dictated entirely by the player base. Sounds good in theory. In practice, it's a mixed bag. There's no built-in system that lets you convert 10 tier 4 permits into one tier 5 recipe. There's no guarantee of access to endgame loot unless the market allows it. And that's where things get unpredictable. Because the economy is driven by players, its fairness is constantly in flux. What's affordable today might be wildly overpriced next week. And on some servers, large guilds may dominate supply, bottleneck prices, or lock solo players out of key upgrades altogether. This randomizes solo player viability in endgame content. If you're playing alone, your ability to get high-end loot without group play is entirely dependent on how your server's economy evolves. To sum it all up, gear progression in Dune works, but only in the functional, not the creative sense. It's satisfying to see numbers go up. It's fun to chase high damage weapons and better tools. But if you're looking for meaningful build crafting, synergy-driven gear combinations or tactical customization through loadouts, you won't find that here. And unless the devs shift focus, you probably never will. And while the transformative trade system holds promise, its reliance on an unstable player-driven economy could either open doors or lock them entirely. While the equipment system in Dune Awakening generally functions well, though it's lacking in standout effects, the ability system introduces a different set of problems. The skill tree is a mixed bag. A few abilities are genuinely fun to use and feel impactful when played to their strength. But the tree is also cluttered with passive damage boosts, and many active abilities feel redundant or outright inferior to others. Most known damage abilities are unlocked within the first few minutes of gameplay, at least for your first class choice. There is no progression system tied to them, no upgrades, no modifiers, no synergy, no build crafting around their interactions or effects. You just pick your 3 favorites, maybe Compel, Bearding Step and Decoy, or Gravity Mine and Force Field Generator, and that's it. Throw in your current best weapon and that's your whole build. Damage dealing abilities work differently. They come in 3 ranks, but upgrading them requires completing a lengthy quest chain tied to a specific trainer. These quests involve substantial back and forth travel and are best handled after unlocking the Ornithopter, which could easily take up to 60 hours of solo play depending on your efficiency. Progression for damage based skills is also awkwardly paced. Tier 1 skills lose relevance quickly once you reach the second zone. But then, once you finally unlock the Ornithopter, you will likely complete both Tier 2 and Tier 3 upgrades back to back. So you spend a large portion of the game stuck at rank 1 and then suddenly jump to rank 3 all at once. Technically, you can complete these trainer quests without the Ornithopter by using a bike and fast travel stations, but this will cost you tens of thousands of Solaris for repeat taxi fees to Harkon Village and the Arakeen outpost, just to talk to the quest givers. And if you try it to do by bike alone, you will easily spend 10 plus hours just traveling back and forth in Haga Basin. In short, don't do that. It's not worth it. Even after all that effort, damage abilities still struggle to scale effectively in the deep desert. And worse, there's no system in place that allows you to specialize in them further, even if you want to focus your build around them. That's the moment where the system really starts to fall apart. This is the same studio that once created Anarchy Online, a game known for its complex stat systems and deep character customization, and The Secret World, which offered flexible builds and synergy-based progression. Neither game was a runaway MMO success, but they both followed a strong creative vision and tried to offer players a real RPG experience. So, to see Dune, a game that markets itself as an RPG launched with an ability system this shallow, is frankly disheartening. Sure, there's fun to be had the first time you try a new skill, but once you have picked your preferred setup, there's little reason to switch, unless you're simply bored. That said, credit where it's due, some abilities, despite the lack of depth or interactivity, just feel good to use. They might not be snappy or responsive, but they offer real moment-to-moment impact. There's a gameplay core here that could support something greater. It just hasn't been expanded on yet. Funcom says they are committed to a 10-year development roadmap for Dune. Whether they truly plan to evolve the progression system remains to be seen. But if they do, the ability system is one of the areas most in need of deeper customization, synergy, and long-term build potential. You will probably hear 2 completely different takes on Dune Awakening's combat. One group will say, it's clunky, barely acceptable for a modern game. And the other, it's fast-paced, tactical, and surprisingly fun. So, which is it? Honestly, both. From a technical standpoint, Dune's combat is far from polished. Hit feedback lacks weight, melee often feels floaty and disconnected, and environment collision bugs are everywhere, throwing off your movement, breaking your momentum, and making combat feel unpredictable in all the wrong ways. Aiming is another issue. Your shots don't align with the crosshair but with the weapon's model position. So trying to shoot from cover often means hitting the wall directly in front of you. And melee, even worse. Janky spacing, unreliable target locking, and frequent physics glitches make close range fighting feel unstable. Put bluntly, this doesn't feel like a finished system, not mechanically, not visually, and certainly not feedback-wise. But here's the strange thing, the design underneath is actually solid. There's a tactical loop here that can feel genuinely engaging when it works. Enemies with shields require you to approach them with the right tools. Combat favors a rock, paper, scissors style counterplay. Heavy gunners with shields will tear you apart if you don't deal with them quickly. Snipers can drop you in 2 or 3 hits, often without telegraphing their shots. Melee attackers need to be parried or crowd controlled to safely open them up for slow attacks. On top of that, there's an interesting risk-reward balance. Firing disables your own shields temporarily, leaving you vulnerable. Melee exposes you to crossfire. Staying back keeps you safer, but makes it easier for enemies to close the gap or flank you. Every combat decision, whether it's positioning, timing, or ability usage, carries weight. You're constantly making on-the-fly decisions. Do you parry the incoming attacker or kite them into a trap? Do you use a crowd control skill to slow the rush or burst down the sniper first? Do you try to isolate a heavy unit with compel or keep the whole room at bay with a well-placed slowing mine? In those tense moments, the combat is actually great. It's in chaotic, no-retreat situations where this system shines brightest. One moment stood out clearly during my playthrough. I entered an Imperial base in the second zone. As I stepped inside, the energy gate slammed shut behind me, turning red. No retreat. The room was crawling with danger. A sniper, several melee units, and 3 to 4 heavily shielded enemies armed with miniguns. The encounter was brutal. I had to adapt on the fly. I dropped mines to slow the rushing melee group, then tried to parry execute the nearest one the moment they stepped out of my gravity bubble, all while dodging heavy gunfire from multiple directions. When I finally got surrounded with no room to escape and melee attackers hammering away at me, the only option left was to retreat. Fall back, run, find a new position, anything to break line of sight. Once I reached cover, I tried to land a few well-placed shots on the sniper, but the melee pack was already closing in again. These moments feel fast-paced, tight, and come with moment-to-moment decision-making, and they are fun. When the system holds together, abilities feel impactful. The need to improvise keeps you focused, combat feels alive. The problem is, the tension and flow are constantly undermined by technical instability. Enemy variety is minimal, bugs are frequent, movement and aiming often break immersion instead of supporting it. In its current state, Dune's combat feels like a game that wants to offer excellent tactical encounters, but is still trapped in janky, unrefined execution. There's a solid core here, a compelling rhythm of risk, positioning and quick thinking. But until the developers polish the systems and tighten the mechanics, that core remains buried beneath rough edges. And if Funcom's long-term roadmap holds true, this is one area that could benefit massively from polish and iteration. Which brings us to the next major topic, the difficulty curve. In the early game, there's barely any challenge. The starting zone is overly forgiving, so much that during the beta weekend, this lack of resistance was one of the biggest letdowns for me. And honestly, too easy can be just as demotivating as too hard. I imagine many players try the game, get bored before anything substantial happens and quit before they ever get to the good parts. At least that was my experience back then. Things pick up significantly in the second zone. Enemies suddenly get much tougher, and you will need to do a bit of farming to keep up with the new power level. But here's the thing, this stretch of the game is genuinely fun. It forces you to improve, introduces stronger opponents and gives you real incentive to explore your abilities. My first runs through the more challenging Imperial labs with shielded enemies and multiple melee attackers felt tense and rewarding. For a while the game really hits its stride. Eventually, things smooth out again, still enjoyable, but the difficulty starts tapering off. Then I began the Bene Gesserit and Swordmaster quest chains. And that was a different beast entirely. I was 2 regions ahead of the curve. Solo, with only a bike in my pocket, enemies hit hard, resources were scarce, and completing these chains felt like a long, brutal expedition. But it was also one of the best parts of my journey. Hiding behind rocks, sniping enemies, baiting them into traps, it was hard, it was slow, but it was satisfying. Unfortunately, once I reached steel tier equipment and especially aluminum, the challenge started to vanish. Most encounters become trivial. The only time I felt real danger was when I got lazy and wandered into sniper fire. Even Imperial Labs, once fearsome, no longer posed a threat. Then came the deep desert. This is where the game throws its hardest spike in difficulty. And honestly, it felt like this is how enemies should have felt all along. It's just a shame that it took over 80 hours to reach that point. To me, the overall difficulty curve has a few strong moments. The early post-tutorial climb, the mid-game quest chains, and finally the deep desert. But it's far too backloaded. Most of the game feel like it's holding back its best encounters, saving them for endgame. And for players who aren't in organized groups, those moments can feel gated off, reserved for guilds, not solo wanderers. And while those moments shine, their placement can make the game feel like a slow burn, one that some players may never stick around long enough to see pay off. Let's talk about the multiplayer side of Dune Awakening. And yes, especially PvP. To me, the game struggles to define what it actually wants to be in that regard. The early and mid-game experience, it feels completely built around solo play. And in many ways, it's a good one, structured, exploratory, and self-paced. But then you hit the survival layer, the gathering, the crafting, the base building, and suddenly the game starts to feel like it was meant for small teams. Systems are bloated, resource needs balloon, and tasks start piling up in a way that feels inefficient for one person to tackle alone. The actual multiplayer presence in those early zones felt disjointed. Most of the time, the only real sign of other players was their buildings. Huge structures cluttering the landscape, often blocking key roads and making travel with a full vehicle a real headache. Whether by accident or on purpose, many of these constructions felt like griefing, and they genuinely took away from my enjoyment. Other times, I would arrive at a camp only to find it completely empty. No enemies left, just silence. The loot chests are instanced in PvE, so that part doesn't matter, but without the fight, there's no tension, no engagement, just a hollow moment of walking in, grabbing rewards and moving on. Across more than 100 hours, I can count the genuinely positive encounters with other players on one hand. The only real highlight was in the Imperial Labs of Region 2. The enemies were still tough there, and without saying a word, no hi, no bye, a couple of us naturally fell into formation, clearing rooms back to back. It was brief, but it felt good. Organic cooperation, a shared moment of pleasure. But for a game that builds itself as an open multiplayer world, Dune doesn't do much to encourage spontaneous team play. It's not like Guild Wars 2 where dynamic world events make you glad to see strangers show up. Here, other players usually felt like obstacles, either because of their structures, their timing, or simply their indifference. That said, the guild system is clearly where the game wants to lean. I didn't play that way myself, but I've played enough survival games to understand the appeal. With the right group of friends, people taking on different roles, working toward a shared goal, the game can feel vibrant and alive. The Deep Desert is the clearest example of this. It's a massive, ever-changing PvP zone that resets weekly and begs to be explored. But make no mistake, it's designed for organized teams. As a solo player, you are in for a rough journey. Sure, I've seen the videos explaining what can be done alone, but let's be honest. The Deep Desert is balanced around having backup. Guilds can sweep through, dominate resource farming, secure key zones, and protect each other from ambushes. Even if enemies only show up in 5% of the Deep Desert, one bad encounter can still ground your ornithopter. One missile from an assault craft hitting your wings is all that it takes to bring you down. And if you don't manage to stash it before they finish you off, you will be riding the taxi service all the way back to Hagar Basin. Points of interest like Imperial Labs, they are not just hard to solo, they are risky. At any moment a full squad might rush in and wipe the floor with you. Now I'm sure some people enjoy the lone wolf experience in a hostile multiplayer sandbox, but I would wager most solo players will eventually bounce off this content. The time investment, the efficiency gap, it's massive. What a solo player needs weeks to accomplish, a guild can do in an evening. So the big question remains. Is Dune Awakening a multiplayer game or a single player game? Or more to the point, is it even the same game for a solo player or a guild? Because from what I experienced, those two realities couldn't be more different. Dune Awakening often feels like three very different games stitched together, each with its own identity, rules and rhythm. The problem is they never fully merge. The first phase, from the start up to unlocking the Ornithopter, plays like a survival RPG with MMO elements layered on top. But at its core, this part of the game feels like a solo experience. Sure, you can rush through it with a guild, but doing so strips away most of the tension. The balance just isn't built for groups. Even with just one companion, I imagine most of the hard-earned victories and scrappy survival moments would disappear. It's a slow burn adventure, and the challenge is tailored for one. Then comes what I would call the most dramatic shift I've experienced in a game in quite some time. The moment you unlock your Ornithopter, everything changes. 1 minute, you are fighting tooth and nail across ridges and valleys, surviving by scavenging, crafting, and sneaking your way through hostile terrain. The world feels vast, layered, and dangerous. The next, you are soaring above it all. The Ornithopter delivers the game's biggest endorphin rush. Finally claiming your wings after hours of effort feels incredible. The freedom, the speed, the sheer power shift is undeniable, but with that freedom comes a massive cost. The survival game disappears. The map, once sprawling and intimate, every hill and crevice familiar from hard-earned traversal suddenly shrinks. It goes from a living, breathing environment to just a blur beneath your wings. Landmarks, worms, water and camp layouts stop mattering. You are no longer navigating terrain, you are bypassing it. From that point on, the game plays like a stripped-down MMO. You fly from quest to quest in minutes, tackling encounters that feel undertuned and simplistic. It feels like a lightweight WoW expansion, just with fewer abilities, simpler encounters, and none of the build depth. The survival tension? Gone. The terrain? Skipped. The fights? Easier. And I don't think the developers fully realized how much of their survival experience they abandoned by enabling that leap. What started as a slow, methodical survival journey becomes a fairly mediocre RPG. But then comes the third shift. One final genre pivot that happens in the deep desert. In this zone, the Ornithopter finally feels like it belongs. The sheer size of the region makes fast travel essential. You're not even considering traveling on foot here, it's simply not viable. But just as the map scale finally justifies the Ornithopter, the game shifts again, this time into a full-blown sandbox PvP. The deep desert is a dynamic, guild-driven war zone. It's not designed for solo players, not really. And while some might enjoy the lone wolf approach in that environment, it's clearly not the intended experience. As someone currently not interested in large-scale guild interaction, this endgame content just doesn't land for me. Hagar Basin is too easy now, there's nothing left to push me there, and while the deep desert is fascinating in concept, it feels like a completely different game, one I'm not equipped or interested in playing right now. So in the end, Dune Awakening isn't just one game. It's 3 games, a solo survival RPG, a lightweight MMO and a PvP sandbox, stacked in sequence but never fully connected. And while each of the 3 phases could appeal to completely different player types, the end result feels less like a genre blend and more like a fully realized identity crisis. The early to mid-game survival experience is genuinely one of the best I've had in a long time. It completely pulled me in. It was immersive, tense, and a total blast. Vehicle handling and world exploration are fantastic. Flying or driving across the dunes just feels right. Combat, despite its flaws, has a lot of tactical depth. Some abilities are genuinely fun to use, and when it all clicks, it can feel rewarding. The power progression actually feels great. Unlocking new gear tiers and seeing your strength rise is satisfying and well paced, especially in the mid-game. It gives a real sense of advancement. The option to build and explore with friends is great, assuming you have friends. If you do, Shared base buildings can be a real highlight. The moment you unlock your ornithopter is magical. You feel like Icarus right before the fall, but for that brief moment you are flying high and it's glorious. The concept behind the deep desert is an ever-changing, high-stakes zone that resets weekly. It's genuinely clever. I love the idea, even if the execution didn't fully land for me. The technical implementation of combat is rough. Animations, hit feedback, physics, it all feels like quite a few patches away from being stable. Mid-game multiplayer feels hollow. Other players don't enrich your experience, they mostly just get in the way, blocking roads or clearing camps before you arrive. The build crafting system feels oddly undercooked. There's potential, but it comes off disjointed. Like Funcom forgot their own MMORPG DNA. It's clunky, lacks cohesion, and offers little room to truly invest in personalized build choices beyond a shallow, surface-level layer. The abrupt genre shifts are jarring. From solo survival to a lightweight MMO to a guild-focused PvP sandbox. These hard turns can be exciting or completely off-putting depending on your playstyle. And on a personal note, I'm not a big fan of PvP being the only real endgame path. I do enjoy PvP. In the right environment. Games like Warhammer Online or Marvel Rivals give you teams, roles, structure. Here, it often feels like you're just logging in to be free entertainment for roaming goods. That's not the kind of PvP I'm signing up for. So after 100 hours, was I wrong about Dune Awakening? Honestly, in some ways, yes, it surprised me. It frustrated me, but it absolutely gave me moments I won't forget. Despite all its rough edges and shifting genres, I had a great time for a large portion of my journey. And I think plenty of players will. But here's the catch. Depending on your preferences, this game might pull a hard left turn into something you don't enjoy. Or maybe you will love that shift. It all comes down to what kind of player you are. For me, the journey up to the ornithopter was a memorable adventure, and I don't regret any of it. But once I soared into the skies, I felt like I had already seen the best the game had to offer, and at that point, I could have walked away satisfied. That said, I'm still curious to see what Funcom does next. Dune Awakening is a young MMO, the foundation is there, and they have hinted at long-term plans, new regions, new systems, maybe even new worlds down the line. The cards are on the table, their hand could still change drastically. So while I've personally put the game down for now, I'll be keeping an eye on it. There's potential here, real meaningful potential. But what about you? Did you enjoy the game? Were there parts that didn't click, or did your journey turn out completely different than mine? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this review and want to hear me ramble more about the mechanics, systems and missteps of other games, a like and a subscribe would really help the channel. Stay sharp, stash your ornithopter and don't get eaten by a sandworm. Have fun exploring the desert.